Elderly woman gives her last $10 to help biker. The next day, 50 riders deliver a life-changing surprise. The rain poured relentlessly that evening, smudging the neon glow of a desolate gas station on the outskirts of town. The air reeked of gasoline, oil, and a biting cold that seemed to sink into her very bones. Marjorie, an elderly woman with a fragile frame, wrapped her thin coat tightly around herself as she stepped off the bus. Her shoes were soaked, her hands shook from the chill, and her body ached from the long day spent sorting donated clothes at the local church. She'd barely earned enough for a loaf of bread. In her pocket, a crumpled $10 bill was all she had left. 10. It was all she had left until her next pension check arrived, still 5 days away. Before we continue, if you believe in the power of kindness, second chances, and the small miracles that still exist in this world, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Bikers Hype. Your support helps spread these reminders of humanity that we often overlook. As Marjorie shuffled past the flickering lights of the convenience store, her weary eyes caught a glimpse of movement near the gas pumps. A man in a weathered leather jacket stood there, his silhouette barely visible in the downpour. Bloodied and bruised, the man struggled to stay upright beside his motorcycle. The insignia on his jacket read Iron Shadows, a name that sent ripples of unease through the town. People whispered about them, bikers, outlaws, troublemakers. But in that moment, all Marjorie saw was pain. His breath came in labored gasps, his knuckles scraped raw, and his eyes glazed with exhaustion. A few of his companions hung nearby, their faces hardened with uncertainty and desperation. One of them kicked the dirt in frustration, muttering about not having enough money for gas or food. Marjorie hesitated, her instincts at war with the world's warnings. She'd been taught to be cautious, especially around men like him. Big, leather-clad, tattooed. But her heart had never learned to fear when it came to helping others. With a deep breath, she slowly stepped forward, her shoes squelching in the wet ground, and placed a trembling hand on his arm. His skin was like ice. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to know who he was. Without a second thought, she pulled out the last $10 she had, the money she'd been saving for her next meal, and pressed it into his rough palm. Then without a word, she turned and walked away, her heart heavy but full. She went inside the store and used the last of her money to buy bottled water, a sandwich, and some bandages. When she returned, the man, who she would later learn was named Colton, was slumped against his bike, doing his best to hide the pain that was etched on his face. Ignoring the curious stares of passers-by who couldn't understand why a woman her age would risk herself for someone like him, Marjorie knelt beside him. She opened the bottle, helping him drink, and gently cleaned the blood that marred his cheek. "You'll be all right," she whispered softly, her voice as soothing as the rain that fell around them, washing away the weight of the world, if only for a moment. Sometimes, even the strongest people need a little help. Colton's eyes glistened with gratitude. He had been in his share of fights, broken bones, and lost friends, but never had he encountered someone so fragile, yet so brave. As Marjorie finished tending to him, she offered a warm smile, wished him safety, and quietly disappeared into the night, carrying nothing but the belief that kindness in some form would eventually find its way back to her. That night, Marjorie returned to her apartment, her stomach empty and aching with hunger. The air was bitterly cold and her cupboards were bare. With a sigh, she lit a single candle, its small flame flickering against the darkness, a quiet symbol of hope in a world that often seemed too harsh. She sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, the world outside blurred in a haze of gray. With a soft sigh, she whispered a small prayer, not for herself but for the biker who seemed so lost in the storm of his life. It was how she had always lived, quietly giving, deeply believing, and never expecting anything in return. The next morning, the clouds parted, and sunlight spilled across the room. Marjorie woke to the distant rumble of engines. At first, she thought it was thunder, but as the sound grew louder, her curiosity piqued. She pulled aside the curtain and froze. A long line of motorcycles was slowly making its way down the street, their engines roaring in unison like a force of nature. At least 50 motorcycles were parked outside her tiny apartment complex, their engines still rumbling, sending vibrations through the ground. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the sound, eager to see what was happening. Marjorie's heart raced as she stepped outside, clutching her sweater against the morning chill. One of the riders, a tall man in a leather vest, walked toward her, holding a bouquet of daisies. Behind him stood Colton, now cleaned up, his bruises fading and his eyes glowing with warmth and gratitude. With a soft smile he spoke, his voice filled with sincerity. "We've come to repay a debt," he said, his words hanging in the air like a promise. It couldn't be measured in dollars. They explained that they had been on a long ride from out of state, part of a veterans charity group that had recently fallen on hard times. At a rest stop, their gas cards had been stolen, leaving them stranded with nothing but their bikes. Marjorie's small act of compassion, her last $10, had gotten them through the night. Thanks to her, they had found shelter, food, and safety when they had nowhere else to turn. But the riders didn't just thank her. They transformed her life. After the ride, they spent the night calling friends, making arrangements, and planning. What they were about to do would change everything. They reached out to friends, shared her story online, and pooled their resources. By the time the morning sun had risen, they handed her an envelope. Inside was over $20,000, money raised by bikers and strangers who had heard about the grandma who gave everything she had. "This is for you," they said. "Enough to fix your roof, fill your cupboards, and make sure you'll never go hungry again." Tears welled up in Marjorie's eyes as the leader of the group knelt beside her, his voice full of gratitude. "You gave us kindness when the world turned away. Today the road gives back to you. It back to you." But that wasn't all. The riders also rebuilt the small community garden outside her building, a place she had once lovingly tended but had been forced to abandon when her arthritis made it too difficult. They brought fresh soil, vibrant plants, colorful flowers, and tools. Together they worked through the afternoon, laughing and sharing stories, their camaraderie filling the air. The sound of revving engines blended with their laughter, creating something beautiful, a symphony of hope. Children from nearby apartments eagerly joined in, helping to water the flowers, their bright smiles lighting up the scene. Neighbors who had barely spoken to one another in years suddenly came together, united by the simple, powerful act of kindness. Years of silence and separation melted away as neighbors gathered, inspired by the kindness unfolding before them. By sunset, the once dull courtyard had transformed into a vibrant tapestry of color, and Marjorie stood at its center. Her hands trembled, not from weakness but from overwhelming gratitude. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, valued, and loved. Before the bikers left, Colton walked up to her with a leather vest in hand. It was custom-made with a small patch on the back that read, "Guardian of the Road." He smiled, his voice thick with emotion as he handed it to her. "You're now an honorary member of our group, and wherever the road takes us, you'll always be a part of this family." As they rode off, they carried her story with them, a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can change the course of 1,000 lives. Marjorie pressed the vest to her chest, overwhelmed by the depth of her emotions. She didn't have words grand enough to capture what she felt. All she could do was whisper, "Thank you." The roar of 50 motorcycles filled the evening air, fading into the horizon like a moving storm of gratitude and grace. As the sun sank below the trees, Marjorie took one last look at the newly planted flowers, the vibrant colors now blooming in the courtyard. It was no longer just a garden. It was a symbol of hope, of community, and of the unexpected miracles that can bloom when kindness is given freely. The envelope of money lay on her table, and the sound of laughter echoed through her neighborhood. Marjorie realized that the true miracle wasn't in what she had received, but in what she had given, the spark of kindness that reignited hope in a world so desperately in need of it. Before we end this story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in Marjorie's place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words matter more than you might realize. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bikers Hype. Together we can keep spreading these moments of humanity that remind us all of the power of kindness. Together, we can continue sharing real stories that remind the world that kindness always has a way of finding its home.